Good morning, church. To everybody that's here and everybody at home. Today's reading will be taken from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 18, verses 1 through 10. These words showed us when Jeremiah was sent by God to observe the potter in the potter's house. It's a fantastic 10-verse message. It speaks to a message he is to be given and pass on to others. And it speaks of God's authority, his love, and his unwavering patience for us. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down to the potter's house, and there I will give you my message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as the potter does? Declares the Lord. Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. O house of Israel, if at any time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be uprooted, torn down and destroyed, and if that nation I warned repents of its evil, then I will relent and not inflict on it the disaster I had planned. And if another time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be built up and planted, and if it does evil in my sight and does not obey me, then I will reconsider the good I had intended to do for it.
All right, good morning, everybody. Hello, good morning. Good to see you all. I just wanted to start out by saying happy winter, I guess. Winter is firmly on us right now. I'm really loud. Okay, there we go. Winter is firmly here with us, I think, right? It's cold. And the cold weather is causing a lot of us to turn indoors for hobbies to pass the time. And I think winter's a really good time for indoor hobbies, right? One of the hobbies I've been wanting to try out this winter is pottery. And I know we have some gifted potters in our congregation, and I brought along with me a mug here to prove that. This is one of my favorite coffee cups, and I use it almost every day. It's really special to me, this one here, because it was made by John Muller. He and Bernice gave Alicia and I like a whole set of these things as a wedding gift when we got married. And so I really appreciate the work that he put into this, and I think it's a beautiful thing, and I use it all the time. I wanted to bring it along today because we're going to be talking a lot about pottery. And so I'll just leave it there for you to see as an example. As you probably noticed from the reading that Ray did for us, pottery is a theme for our lesson today. And for those who are unfamiliar with pottery, I have a short video here. I'll just let it play while I talk. But if you're not familiar with pottery like myself, you can see how this is kind of an amazing process. It's a process where somebody takes like a lump of like clay, just some dirt from the ground basically, and turns it into something beautiful. The clay, it gets spun around at varying speeds on a table, and then the potter, uses their hands to shape the clay. He's making a pot here or something like that. And then after it's shaped, the vessel gets put into the furnace, the oven. It gets fired, it's called. It's just a really hot oven, and it hardens and cures the clay into something like my cup or like this flower pot here. I think the thing that I find maybe the most interesting about pottery is just how this process has been used for so long, like thousands of years. I was researching it a bit leading up to the sermon, and it's really neat because the process that people are using today has really been around and really hasn't changed a whole lot in thousands of years. So it's a pretty neat thing that we're still doing this today. As Jay mentioned in last week, in 2022, we're going to be focusing on what the Bible says about relationships and how God can use our relationships to form us and to form the people around us into the image of Jesus. And so I think the best place that we can start when it comes to talking about relationships is to talk about our relationship with God. And so in January and February, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to try to focus our time on our relationship with God. And so when it comes to that, we're getting to that this morning. And the Bible talks about pottery a lot, and it uses the image of pottery many times to describe our relationship with God. But one of the most striking passages, I think, comes from Jeremiah 18, which we just read. We can learn a lot, I think, about our relationship with God from the illustration of the clay and the potter. And so today we're going to focus on that. I want to talk about what Jeremiah saw when he went to the potter's house and break down our discussion into 3 parts. We're going to look at 3 lessons that Jeremiah learned from the potter's house, including a lesson about the clay, a lesson about the potter, and then a lesson about the work of the potter's hands, or the pot. So let's get started with the first one, with the clay this morning. I was curious a bit about the cost of clay, so I looked it up. I found a place in Winnipeg that sells pottery clay, and so I wanted to know what it costs, and it turned out it was pretty cheap. Like, you can get a kilogram of basic pottery clay for like $1 or $2 a kilogram. It's pretty cheap, it's just clay from the ground. Somebody digs it out of the ground, they remove the impurities, and there you have it. You have some clay. So the clay itself, it's not really worth a whole lot, but things change pretty significantly when you put that clay into the hands of a skilled potter. I'm not sure how many people are up to date on the world of collectible pottery, but if you are, you may have noticed that a new record was set in 2021 for the most expensive ceramic vase ever sold. It's pretty interesting. Here's a picture of the vase. It was crafted way back in the 18th century, apparently, and it was sold last June for, get this, a whopping $41.6 million. Pretty impressive, right? I mean, the raw materials for this vase probably didn't cost more than a cup of coffee, but you put that clay that's just dug out of the ground into the hands of a skilled potter, and the ordinary clay becomes something incredibly valuable. And this is the first critical lesson that we learn from the potter's house, and that we learn about our relationship with God. Verse 4 points out that when Jeremiah went to the potter's house, he noticed that the potter was shaping the clay with his hands. The potter, he was just taking ordinary clay and giving it a value and giving it purpose. And the clay had a value and purpose that it could have never had on its own. And in the same way, just like the clay pot, it's important for us to see that we did not create ourselves, and we are not our own. On our own, we don't really have a whole lot of value either. Genesis said that God made the first man, Adam, out of the dust of the earth. And since we've all descended from Adam and Eve, we can't really claim to be anything special either. It's only when God gets a hold of our lives and He shapes us that we gain value and we gain a purpose. And God certainly does give us a high value. As the psalmist said in Psalm 139:14, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. As Jay said last week, in the Western world, we seem to be fixated on being strong, self-made individuals. And it's good, I think, to strive for success and growth and all of that. But as Christians, we need to recognize that our true value, it comes from God. Without Him, we're nothing. The illustration of the potter and the clay makes that very clear. God gives us everything we have. He makes us valuable. And today we try and say, we think all the time, we're self-made individuals. That might be a popular way to think, but it's just not true, is it? I mean, for anybody. Everything we have is because of God and because of what God has done for us. And we looked at this scripture last week too, but I wanted to bring it up again because it's so beautiful from Colossians 1:16. It says, for by Him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. God made all things through Jesus Christ. And verse 16 here points out that we were created, that all things were created for Him, actually. It's kind of like the potter again, right? Making the pot. He creates a pot for his own purposes. And how ridiculous would it be for the pot if it could think that somehow the potter existed to serve the pot, to serve its own purposes. Even though that seems ridiculous, I think sometimes, we get that backwards in our relationship with God. If we're not careful, we might end up thinking that God exists to make us happy or to accomplish our goals or that he owes us something. But of course, that's just not the case, right? Isaiah made that clear as well with the same sort of analogy. Again, he said, "Yet you, Lord, are the Father." Our Father, sorry. We are the clay and you are the potter. We are the work of your hands. So as we explore our relationship with God, I think it's important for us to understand our place before him. We need to respect who he is as our God and Father and treat him with the respect that he deserves. This matters. It matters because it sets the tone, a tone of respect in our relationship with him. He is our loving God. And he's our Father who knows us better than anyone, but we also need to remember that he has authority over all things, including our own lives. And this means that we need to be willing to bend towards his will, not the other way around. So back in our text that Ray read for us in verses 7 to 10, we see this. We see how God describes his authority over the nations. He makes it clear that he wants to work with people who obey him and that he will punish those who don't. But it's important, I think, to remember that when we talk about punishment, it's not that God wants to discipline us because he wants to enjoy us, that he enjoys watching us suffer. It's actually the opposite, right? God is love, and everything that he does is because he loves us, including when he disciplines us. He disciplines us to bring us in line with his will because he knows that his will is ultimately what is best for us. He knows that when we follow his will, we're going to be blessed both now and for eternity. Just like the potter, right? The potter, he molds and he shapes that clay into something that's beautiful. And he wants that clay to mold and bend with the touch of his hand, because he's making something beautiful. And it's only through the guidance of the potter that clay becomes anything. Sometimes the clay, it might have a rock in there or some impurities, and so the potter needs to stop and dig out whatever is impure. And removing those impurities, for the clay, that might be painful, but it's necessary if the potter is going to create a work of art. And so the first lesson that we learn from the potter's house is that we are the clay. And as the clay, we need to be willing to bend towards the will of the potter, not the other way around. And this is important because God knows what's best for us. And if we bend towards his will, he gives us value. He gives us purpose that we could never give to ourselves. So that's the first lesson from the potter's house. The second one that I want to talk about is about the potter himself, who is, of course, God in the illustration, right? The potter is sovereign over his work. Sovereign. He's in total control. In Jeremiah's time, the potter was using a spinning wheel, which is much like what's happening today still. Like I said, it hasn't changed a lot. He used the spinning wheel to help shape the clay, to control the speed of the wheel. He has got control over that. And besides the wheel, of course, the potter, he also has his hands, right? He's in control of his hands as he shapes the clay. And he also has control over the oven, the temperature, the time, all of that's used to harden the clay after it's been formed. So the potter, he controls the wheel, he controls his hands and the oven, everything. He's in total control of everything in the process. And it's up to him to choose how things are going to go down. He is sovereign. And it seems to be a main point in here, a point that God is trying to make here in verse 6. He says that he is in total control of Israel. They are in his hands. And it's the same thing with us today, right? But that's an easy thing to say. We're in God's hands, right? We're in God's hands, just trust him. But as probably all of us has experienced, it's not always that easy to do. The pottery wheel, I think, is actually a really great illustration of what life can feel like sometimes. So go back to the video. Sometimes it feels like we're spinning around. We're losing our minds because we have no idea why things are the way they are. And then on top of that, sometimes as the clay we're being formed in ways that's very uncomfortable and we can't really understand why. Or maybe sometimes it feels like the oven, it's too hot, it's too uncomfortable. We don't know why it has to be the way it has to be. In these times, I think we're tempted to question God. We wonder why things have to happen the way they do. And so I'm really thankful for these lessons from the Potter's house because, at least for me, it helps give me some insight into the difficulties of the things that happen in my life. If I'm the clay and the potter's only halfway through forming me into a beautiful flower pot, I might wonder why I'm in the state that I'm in and where things are headed. If all I can really understand is what is happening at this moment, and I don't know what the potter has in mind, it might be easy for me to think that things are not right or that he has no idea what he's doing. Maybe, it was more comfortable when I was just a lump of clay, but now I'm being spun and stretched and reshaped, and I can't figure out what the potter is up to. I thought I was going to be a plate for a while, but now I'm getting shaped more and more, and it's causing me to stretch, and the speed's increasing, and I don't know what he's doing and where it's going, and on it goes. I'm sure some of you can relate to that, right? Maybe things don't make much sense in your life right now, and we wonder, why? Why are we in the position we're in? But this scene from the Potter's house helps us to remember that we are a work in progress. Everything is a work in progress. But this scene from the Potter's house also helps us to see that, things are not complete yet. And it's a work in progress, yes, but not just any work. It's a work that's in the hands of the true potter. And we need to trust that God has a plan for all of us that is better than anything that we can imagine. After all, we're just the clay, right? He's the potter. He has the vision. He has the wisdom. He has the foresight that we do not. And so we need to trust him with what we can't understand. We didn't have time to get to this in the reading, but if we kept going after verse 10, down in verses 13 to 15, God, he begins to confront the Israelites for not trusting in him. Look at what he says here in verse 13. Therefore, this is what the Lord says, inquire among the nations, who's ever heard of anything like this? A most horrible thing has been done by virgin Israel. Does the snow of Lebanon ever vanish from its rocky slopes? Do its cool waters from distant sources ever stop flowing? Yet my people have forgotten me. They burn incense to worthless idols. And we'll pick up with the rest of 15 in a minute. But in essence, what God's saying here, I think, is that what my people are doing doesn't make any sense. The snow on the mountains, it never forgets where it came from. And the water that flows down from the mountains, it's always connected to its source. But yet, the people of Israel, they've forgotten where they came from. They've lost connection with me, their source of life, the one who formed them. The Israelites, they forgot their maker and they were chasing after worthless idols. But the question today is not so much about the Israelites, it's about us. How are we doing? May God help us never lose connection with him. We cannot forget the God who made us, the God who loves us, the God who knows what's best for us. We can't stop going to him as the source of every good thing we have in our lives. We can't stop trusting him, even if things get hard, even if things seem to be falling apart around us and they just don't make sense, even if we're in the middle of a pandemic that never seems to end. He is still in control. He is still God, and we could still trust in him. Let's not forget what it says in Romans 8:28. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And also what we have here in Philippians, I really appreciate this scripture. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. I think these are very important scriptures. Very important for us as we consider how our relationship with God helps us to deal with the things in our lives that we might think are less than ideal. The fact that God is the potter and that we are the clay should help us to understand this command here that we have not to grumble and complain. If we really believe that God is in control and that He is working through the situations in our life for good, does it make sense for us to complain about it? If we need to be molded and shaped to become the work of art that He's trying to make us, does it make sense for us to complain about the situations in our lives that He is using to shape us? James talks about this in chapter 1, verse 2 to 4. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work in you, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." It's an amazing verse. When those difficult times come, we've got a choice to either respond with bitterness and complaining or with perseverance and trust. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean we're going to understand why either, but it's a shift in focus that recognizes God as the sovereign Lord over our lives. It's a shift in focus that chooses to trust that He is at work for good, the good of us in all circumstances, whether easy or difficult. This shift in focus helps us to see the hard parts of our life as more than just a set of random circumstances that suck. Instead, we start to see them as situations that God is using to shape us into the people He wants us to be, which is ultimately something that we can be thankful for. It's the potter at work for good. You know, this is easier said than done, obviously, especially in our culture today that treats grumbling and complaining as almost like a pastime. But the Scriptures give us the truth that can set us free from following this trend. Instead of complaining, we can trust God through the trials. And we can actually find joy knowing that He is in control and that He's working all things for good. And so the second lesson we learn from the potter's house today is that the potter, our God, He's in complete control. And because He is a good potter who promises to do what is best for us, we can trust Him even if things aren't making sense. We don't need to complain about the difficult circumstances like those people around us who don't know God, because we know that He uses the pressures in life to shape us, and we can trust Him with that. And so finally, I want to talk about one final lesson we learned from the potter's house. In our text today, we're going to talk about the pot, the work of the potter's hand, what he is shaping and making. In our text that Ray read, the potter that Jeremiah saw working in his house, he was making a pot. You know, he could have been making anything, coffee cup. The Bible doesn't say why he was making a pot, but he chose to make a pot. You know, maybe there was a big event coming up and he needed to make a big batch of stew or something, or maybe it was a wedding gift, or maybe he was going to sell it in his shop. Whatever the case, he made that pot with a purpose in mind, a purpose. It wasn't just something he was doing to pass the time. And that's what I want us to focus on next. God is our potter. And so He made us with a purpose as well. But sometimes we get distracted, right? We get caught up doing a bunch of things that have nothing to do with our purpose. The Israelites forgot about their purpose too. And God warned them about that down in verses 11 and 12. The second half of 11 starts like this. "So turn from your evil ways, each one of you, and reform your ways and your actions." But the people, in verse 12, they responded, saying, "That is in vain. We will follow our own plans, and will every one of us act according to the stubbornness of his evil heart." God wanted the Israelites, He wants us to be good clay in His hands. He wanted the Israelites to be willing to be formed and shaped for His purposes. But the Israelites didn't like that. They didn't like the purposes that God had created for them. They wanted to be the potter over their own lives instead. They wanted to follow their own hearts. God described it like this later on in verse 15. He said, "Yet my people have forgotten me. They burn incense to worthless idols, which made them stumble in their ways, in the ancient paths. They made them walk in byways, not on the roads built up. The Israelites, they forgot why God created them. Instead, they chose to follow the false gods of this world. And of course, it's no different for us today. There are still many false gods in this world today that try to distract us from God's plan for us. It's kind of like my cup of coffee, right? I think John designed that thing to hold coffee or tea. But what if the cup refused to serve that purpose? What if it only wanted to be filled up with soy sauce? It looks kind of the same, actually, soy sauce and coffee, but if someone were to take a sip, they'd be in for a real shock, wouldn't they? It's the same thing with us. God made us God made us with a purpose. He made us to be a vessel carrying His blessings to the people in the world around us. But if we reject His purposes for us and we fill ourselves up with the things of the world instead, we're going to end up tasting more like a curse to others than the blessing that God intended us to be. We have a purpose. Being in a relationship with God includes embracing that purpose, the purpose for which He made us. Verse 15 here, it says that His purposes for us are like an ancient, reliable highway that leads towards life. A good question for all of us to reflect on today is, which road are you on right now? Are you following God's path for your life? How do you know? Thankfully, if we're lost or if we're not sure, the Bible tells us exactly what we need to do, or rather, who we need to follow to get back on track. It's amazing words that Jesus spoke here in John 14. He said to them, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So no matter where we find ourselves or no matter how far we've strayed, there is always a path back to God, and that path is through His Son, Jesus Christ. He is the one and only way to the Father. Following Him is the most important thing we can do with our lives. It is our purpose. There are so many things, though, that try to tear us away from that purpose. So many things that distract us from the real reason that God created us. It's easy to get busy just doing the same things that the rest of the world around us is doing. But as children of God, as followers of Jesus, we have a different purpose. Jesus didn't come just to save us for eternity. He also came to give us a new purpose in this life right now. And it's a new trajectory, a new hope for us. Paul talked about this in Colossians 2 and 3. He said that from now on as Christians, we are to set our minds on the things that are above, not on the things of the earth. For we have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. I love that verse. The potter, our potter, He has made us with a purpose, and we need to turn away from the pursuits of this world and set our minds on that purpose. We're not just here to pass the time in this world until we get to heaven. God has a purpose for us right now as well. And that's the last lesson that we learned from the potter's house. Just like the potter who made a cup or a bowl with an intended purpose, God has made us to be in a relationship with Him. A relationship where we bear His image and we experience the blessings that come along with that. And He wants us to love and serve the people around us so that they can also experience the blessings of knowing God as well. And so I hope these lessons from the potter's house today will help us better understand our relationship with God. The first lesson is that we are the clay in the relationship, not the potter. On our own, we've got very little value, and it's only when He shapes us that we become something valuable. Because of this, we need to be willing to bend and shape towards His will. Because when we do, God is going to mold us and shape us into who we were meant to be. The second lesson we learn is about the potter himself, our God. The potter, he wants to carefully mold us and shape us with love so that we can accomplish his will in our lives. You know, the process of that molding and shaping, it's not always going to be comfortable though. But when we go through it, we can trust him, even when things don't make sense, because he knows and understands far more than we do. He knows exactly what he's doing. And finally, we learn about the pot. The third lesson is about the pot, the work of the potter's hands. The scriptures show us that God has a new purpose and a new direction for each of us. And being in a relationship with Him is what that purpose is. And when we're in a relationship with Him, it means that we accept His purpose for our lives. The relationship that we have with God means so much more than just being with Him in heaven one day when we die. It also means that we accept His plan and His purposes for our lives right now, today, every day, as we do our best to follow Him. So we're going to end off with a song called Have Thine Own Way, Lord. And I think this is a perfect way for us to end off in this lesson, because the song follows the same analogy we've been talking about from Jeremiah 18 today. It's really a prayer to God, this song, a prayer where we ask Him to mold us and shape our lives so that we can be the people that He's called us to be. If you're listening to my voice today and you know that you've strayed off that path that God has for you, I want you to know it's not too late. It's never too late, as long as your heart is still beating. Maybe you feel like you're clay that's been marred, marred clay in the hands of the potter. You're full of imperfections. You're full of impurities. Yeah, me too. But the good news is that He can still purify you and He can still form you if you're willing. He's an expert at this. And if you're feeling lost, you don't know what to do next, please feel free to come and talk to me. Or maybe, when you think about your life, you realize that you've been trying to be the potter over your own life instead of letting God take control. If you're ready to let go, and if you're ready to let the true potter take over, you want somebody to talk to or pray about with that, please also feel free to reach out to me as well. Thanks for your time today.